All right, guys, today we are going to be looking at the structure of ATP and the function of ATP. And ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and you should know that it is the cell's energy shuttle. When we talk about the currency of the cell, what's the money that drives that cell? It's ATP because it's what provides energy for cellular work. So let's take a look at its structure. If we look at this molecule here, adenine, remember this is one of our base pairs that we talked about in our macromolecule section. It's a nucleic acid that we can see. Next, we have ribose, which is a 5-carbon sugar. And then the third big part are our 3 phosphate groups. Now, take a look at this. Our 3 phosphate groups all have a negative charge. And I know you guys are very aware that like charges do not like each other. So you have these negative charges all bunched together, and they don't want to be. They are not happy about it. So what we see here is that we have a lot of available energy because they are trying to get away. Okay? Very important because we're going to talk about where the energy comes from when we break down ATP. So I might be coming back to that slide because I like it better than this one a little bit. So how do we break down ATP? Well, it's hydrolysis. Remember, the addition of water is what is going to break this molecule down. So when water is added, the bonds between the phosphate group of ATP's tail are broken. And then energy is going to be released from ATP when this last phosphate bond is broken off. Now, do not think that energy is released when we break bonds. No. Big, huge misconception. Okay? When bonds are broken, energy is absorbed. When bonds are formed, energy is released. So when we talk about energy being released, we're looking at the reaction as a whole, not this one little step here. You have to remember that reactions are a series of steps. It's not just this one. A couple different things are happening. What we are seeing, one, is that, yes, it takes energy to break off that 3rd phosphate group. When that happens, water, remember, water comes in and it breaks off that 3rd phosphate group, and it's going to become phosphorylated, and we form this inorganic phosphate here. Now, what's an inorganic phosphate? Well, again, I'm going to do some awful drawing here. HOPO4. HOPO4 is our inorganic phosphate. Okay, and when these bonds form, we release a great deal of energy. Now, why does ATP release so much more energy than other molecules? It's because of these 3 phosphates that have that negative charge that don't want to be next to each other. And so it's like this one is running away, and when it joins with water, so this one right here, running away, joins with water, boom, lots of energy gets released when those bonds come together. Okay, so this release of energy comes from the chemical change to a state of lower free energy. Now remember, free energy means available energy. So this isn't coming from the bond. No, not from the bond. What it's coming from is this molecule here has a lot of available energy. Now we've gone to a more stable, so it has less available energy, and that is how energy got released. So when we say energy gets released, for what? Well, here's what. That ATP, that major currency, allows the cell to do 3 main types of work: chemical, mechanical, and transport. And these three types of cellular work are all powered by the hydrolysis of ATP, ATP being broken down in the presence of water. So to do work, cells are going to manage those energy resources by energy coupling. And we learned about this when we looked at free energy. That is, energy coupling is when we take the release of energy from an exergonic reaction and we use that to power an endergonic reaction. For example, ATP overall is an exergonic reaction because it's going to release more energy than it takes to break that bond. Also, in doing so, that amount of energy can be used to power mechanical work, such as it will phosphorylate a motor protein, and when it transfers that third phosphate to a motor protein, when that phosphate joins to that motor protein, boom, lots of energy gets released, which is going to allow the motor protein to move. We also see this is how cilia can move. When we look at transport work, ATP we know is used in active transport. We want to move from a low concentration to a high concentration. How do we do this? ATP breaks down in the presence of water. This third phosphate phosphorylates or joins. Okay, this phosphate gets transferred to the protein, phosphorylates it. When this happens, we release energy, which pushes those molecules from low to high. Okay, and then the phosphate, inorganic phosphate, is released, and we'll talk about what happens once we get there. Lastly, ATP is used for chemical work. For example, we talked about in the last flip, we looked at how glutamic acid and ammonia combine together to form a product, glutamine, okay, which is our amino acid. Remember, anytime we take simpler molecules and we combine them to form a larger molecule, that is an endergonic reaction. We're taking two things, we're going to combine them, that is endergonic. Or you might also remember anabolic. We're taking an absorption of energy here. Where do we get the energy to power this reaction? Again, ATP. ATP is broken down, that third phosphate attaches to glutamine. We get this energy that's released, which allows the two to combine, and now we have glutamine. Okay, so I kind of went through everything right there because I tend to get really excited. And again, just another great example showing chemical work, how we're building a larger molecule from some smaller molecules and how ATP pushes those endergonic reactions forward by transferring that phosphate group to the other molecule. And when it transfers that phosphate group, it phosphorylates the reactant. That is what's going to cause the energy release, which will push the reaction forward. Remember, energy is released when bonds are formed, and energy is absorbed when bonds are broken. Again, mechanical work, we phosphorylate that carrier protein. Oh, my bad. That is not a carrier protein. I am so sorry. That is a motor protein. That is a carrier protein where ATP phosphorylates that carrier protein to power low to high, otherwise known as active transport. So let's look really quick at the regeneration of ATP. ATP is a renewable resource that is regenerated by addition of a phosphate group to ADP. So this is a continual cycle. ATP is broken down in the process of hydrolysis, right? Addition of water, ATP, that third phosphate group, is broken off, and it is used to go phosphorylate another molecule. This reaction is exergonic. E, X, E, R, exergonic. Okay, we're going to get a net release of energy here. But for us to make ATP, again, we are taking simpler molecules, combining them to form a larger molecule. What kind of reaction is this? You guessed it, endergonic. Okay? Remember, anytime you have a cycle or reactions that can be reversed, one always has to be exergonic and one has to be endergonic. You can't have a downhill without the uphill. Okay? As I used to always remember on a bike ride, can't go downhill unless you go uphill first. So, what happens here is the ATP gets broken down, releases energy. Now we have ADP plus our inorganic phosphate. We get energy coming in from another exergonic reaction, which causes those two to join, and now we have ATP. Okay, this is our chemical potential energy temporarily stored in that ATP that's going to drive most of our cellular work. Now, this regeneration, incredibly important. If it wasn't for the regeneration, we would be hosed because we can, working muscle, recycle its entire pool of ATP in 1 minute. Guys, that's 10 million ATP molecules a second. That's incredibly fast and incredibly efficient. We move through a lot of ATP, and if I keep going like this, I'm just generating some more. Okay, recycling, recycling, and recycling. And that's a good thing that we can recycle. If not, we would go through our body weight of ATP in a day. Crazy. Okay, so we are going to spend some more time looking at ATP and how wonderful it is and how it is used to power through and push all of these reactions so that they are spontaneous in our cells and in our organisms themselves. Until then, see you later.